Well, first of all, Avril, thank you very much for describing somebody who doesn't know quite what he wants to be when he grows up. I was at a rugby reunion not so long ago when somebody came up to me and said, "Didn't you used to be Ian McCallum?" This is some serious identity confusion, and of course identity is a big part of our subject this evening. I do want to say how much I enjoyed hearing Linda speaking about her stories. It's so critical. To hear you, Patrick, going very, very much on the top of your game, and you're so easy to listen to, and thank you for the clarity of your message. I'm very thrilled to see Emma Oliver here this evening. I had the great privilege of meeting her late husband John literally this time last year, in May. And I just had one regret, and that is I didn't get to know him sooner, because he passed on far too prematurely, not too long after that. But we know pretty well that John Oliver is very, very active as an activist for Princess Vlei. And really, the work of people like him and Bishop Jeff Davies, who introduce and advocate the spiritual significance of the environment, is going to become more and more important, irrespective of what our particular creed, philosophies may be. Ultimately, and I would like to suggest this, that we are looking at something which Philip Bam has beautifully drawn attention to. And that is the concept of soul, and the tragedy of the loss of soul, which is quite interesting, because soul and psyche mean exactly the same thing. And so psychology is the study of the soul. It goes back a long time. And the big question is how much of this has to do with a particular identity. I would like to say thank you very much to you, Mia, for inviting me to speak here. I do want to tell you that when I was invited originally, more was still on the cards for Princess Vlei. And I was away in Ethiopia on a guide training course when Sharon, my wife, sent me the news to say, Princess Vlei has been saved. That's where I heard the news. It was really wonderful. So I wrote to Mia and said, look, I'm not sure whether you still want to continue with this meeting, because it makes it an awful lot easier. It's like a rhyme to do something of a victory lap. However, I would like to say perhaps this is only the beginning. And that this particular victory must be treated with a huge degree of gratitude for a start, I think. And then the second is that there is no time to rest on laurels. And the victory here must be an example for, I can assure you, and we all know this, for repeated attempts to usurp other pristine and essential areas, not only in this city, but in this country. And we must be able to say, don't forget Princess Vlei. Never forget Princess Vlei, what happened here. Because of the people. And never ever underestimate the intelligence of the local people who made this possible, made this victory possible. And so this has bearings, as far as I'm concerned, on many, many other environmental threats in this country. And I will relate this evening distinctly to the whole concept of identity. I arrived at Princess Vlei this afternoon. I took a motorbike ride up just to go and have a look at the old Vlei. There it was. I've been protesting in September of 2012. And there I saw people fishing. There were children, some with their parents. There were two young lovers, obviously planning their future. There was a man who was wearing a Manchester United shirt, soccer shirt. Clearly, he still hadn't stopped celebrating for Manchester's victory on Saturday afternoon. I looked at the the surroundings, and there was another broken down concrete garbage container, and around it plastic pieces of paper. And I then walked closer to the bin and looked inside the bin. And I'm happy to tell you there was more garbage in the bin than there was outside. And for me, there's a kind of a lesson in that, you know. You so easily get put off by the negative. Look what some people are doing. They don't put things away. Have a look and see the work which the good people are actually doing. And I have absolutely no doubt about it that this room is filled with, if you don't mind me saying, it's filled with the converted. This room is rich in people who care. And I think that to me is an outstanding leadership quality. In fact, there are two leadership qualities, I think. And one is that you get up early, and the second one is you give a damn. And to get up early does not mean that you get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. It's to get ahead of the game. To give a damn. And that's the question that only you can answer for yourselves. But this evening, and I can promise you, I will not be keeping you too long. We heard two very, very informative presentations, and I really just have the pleasure, in many, many respects, of doing something of a summary, of enhancing or echoing much of what they have said. But what I will tell you is that I will never forget a story, because it's a true story. I was in Umfolozi Game Reserve in 1981. It was the very, very first time that I'd been on foot in a wild area, very, very different to being exposed to wild animals from the safety of the windscreen of a vehicle. And I met for the first time a man called Makubo Ntombela, who was a great friend and mentor of Ian McCallum, who I had met just prior. And it was during this particular trail that I knew I had come home. So really, there was a renewed concept of home. What does home mean? But secondly, I couldn't articulate what I'm going to be telling you now, is that it had a profound spiritual impact on me. A greater sense of what it means to be a guest, at least a guest in an environment where I was no longer in charge, but I was one of a number of potential equals with all animals, trees, birds, plants. An amazing kind of feeling. But Makubo, one evening on that 4-night trail, gave me a branch of a tree which is known as the Sisyphus mucronata in Latin. In Afrikaans it's called the Blinkblad Wachabiki. In English, I don't know how they always manage to distort things. It's called the buffalo thorn. But amongst the Zulu people, and that includes, by the way, the broader Nguni speaking people group, the Sisyphus mucronata, known as the Mpafa, has philosophical significance. Because he showed me 2 rows of thorns on every branch of the tree. He gave me this branch. He said, look, you see this one here? These thorns which are going this way. They say, may the wind be in your face, when you think of the next generation, when you face the future. And the one which hooks back on that same branch says, never forget where you have come from. Never forget where you have come from. Now, I cannot for the life of me think of a more simple and profound philosophy in life. Think ahead, may the wind be in your face, follow your dreams, but never forget where you come from. Why? Because it's always an opportunity to say thank you. To say thank you to people who, if it wasn't for them, that you and I would not be where we are this evening. And so, I just find myself, for example, on this platform. I'm here because of countless other people believe me. People who've influenced my life, and too many to mention. But as Philip Bam said, this Vlei is more than just the vegetation around it. Vlei has a soul. Listen to this poem by Antonio Machado. The wind, 1 billion day, called to my soul with the odor of jasmine. In exchange for the odor of my jasmine, I would like the odor of your roses. But I have no roses. All the flowers in my garden are dead. Well, I will take the yellow leaves and the withered petals and the waters from your fountain. And the wind left, and my soul wept and said, what have you done with the garden that was entrusted to you? And the wind left, and my soul wept and said, what have you done with the garden that was entrusted to you? Who on earth is Antonio Machado speaking to? And I think all of us, even in a small way, will realize he's actually speaking to each one of us. He's not only asking, what have you done with the garden? He's in many respects asking, what are you doing with your life? What have you done with your life? What does it mean to live in a city where you have a waterway like this? What does it mean to live in a country of such immense beauty? What are you doing to it? I think deep down we're talking about this link to human identity. And so, that soul is there. And what does it say to me? It actually reminds me of the need to redefine one of the most marvelous mantras you could hear. It is the mantra of Ubuntu. And Ubuntu, as we all know, means because of you I exist. Because of you I exist. Well, I would like to suggest and encourage that we take Ubuntu way beyond its human confinement, not just to you, because of you that I exist, but to every living thing, to the trees, to the geology of this city, to look up at this mountain range over here and to know that the early geology of South Africa, trace elements of those rocks are in our skin, in our system. And we are linked to every single living thing. And therefore our identity is very much dependent on a sense of that kind of relationship. So the Ubuntu is ultimately about a profound respect and gratitude for relationships. But let's extend that to, as I say, beyond just to human limits, to a greater understanding of our relationship to the other living things. And so when one looks at issues around Princess Vlei, and not only the fight for the Vlei, but the victory, one quickly sees here three very, very important issues, I think. One is the issue of identity, and the other is the issue around what we call moral issue, and the third is the conservation issue, which I've just barely touched on. Identity is a very, very complex subject, as we say. For example, would the real Ian McCallum please stand up? Well, who do you want? Do you want the boy to stand up and speak? Do you want the adolescent to have his say? Or would you like the aging adolescent to continue doing what he's doing? Who are you? Who am I? And I think what you realize is that in terms of the analysis of the complexity of identity, that who you and I are is impossible to define outside of our relationships. And that to me is a very humbling thought. It's a humbling realization. In British Columbia, not too long ago, the government of Canada had decided that they would be utilizing a large section of land that was traditional land for very similar reasons to the explorations of different parts of South Africa in the millennium, for mining, for energy sources. And they did the environmental impact studies and they succeeded. And however, there was an appeal. And at the appeal, a group of elders of the traditional American native people who lived in that area appeared in court. And even though they lost their appeal, the laws surrounding the analysis of environmental impact studies in Canada changed forever. But it was on the basis of something which one of the elders had to say. he stood up, and in his broken English, he looked at the developers, the government developers, and he asked a very, very simple question. If this is your land, where are your stories? Think about that. If this is your land, where are your stories? Do you think we should put a similar question to Royal Dutch Shell when they approach the South African government? Do you think we should ask the developers, please will you tell us your stories before you move into this part of our country? What was that question ultimately about? People understood immediately what it was about. They could not articulate it, but ultimately this was about a challenge to the identity of the people who have lived there. Why? Because your and my identity is not only deepened, it is dependent on our stories, on every one of us having our own once upon a time story. And think about that. There is not that's probably one of the finest opening lines in poetry that I know of. That line which says, once upon a time. And I defy anybody in this audience not to incline your ear when I say, I have a story to tell you, and it begins once upon a time. Why? There's a strong possibility that I could be telling you a story. Once upon a time, there was a little boy or a little girl. Gotcha. And they grew up in a city, in a far corner of a distant continent. And his childhood was amazing. The waterway. And then, one day, that fateful first line of the second verse, the one that happens to every one of us in our lives, and then one day, as they say in the classic, SH1T happens. It happens. The developers move in. Somebody comes in. Somebody came in from far away. And we have a dilemma, and the hero is stirred. The heroine is stirred. These are the values of our stories. Why? Because all of these stories, Princess Vlei, and all of them, I'm just going to stay with Princess Vlei, has something to do with you and me. Now, let me just say this to you. That one of my big concerns these days, and interest really, as a practicing psychiatrist and therapist, is the sense of psychological discontent when people are displaced or when there has been a change in the geography of not only the immediate environment, but certainly a change in what could be described as the geography of the childhood of those particular people who I see. Because we all have not only a history of our childhood, we have a geography of our childhood. If you were to come to me, it wouldn't take too long before I would start asking you questions about where you come from. And did you have a favorite tree in your garden? Did you keep animals? What happened to them? Was there a stream that flowed near to where you lived? Does it still flow? When last did you go there? You'll be amazed at the emotional impact of those questions. And what am I saying? I'm saying that perhaps one of the most undiagnosed conditions in modern psychiatry is called homesickness. If this is your land, where are your stories? It was a redefining of home. And home is a deep sense of identity. And you know, I just think, as I wrap up what I want to say this evening, when we start examining again and just taking identity just a little further, identity is always linked to place. It's a place or a position. Who am I will invariably be explained in ways that you define a kind of a boundary. So who you are and where you come from become intimately linked. But that place is deeply connected to one of the great human needs, and that is the need to belong. And this is why you'll read over and over again, you'll hear from many, many people the importance of community. Why? Because it feeds, nourishes one of our greatest needs, that need to belong. But just take that word just a little further, to belong. It's one thing to belong. It's another thing to know that something belongs to you. Something belongs to you. And you can name it. It's another thought to be able to say it's one thing that something belongs to me, but it's that which belongs to us. To us. It takes on a different feel, doesn't it? And then there's a third kind of belonging. Is that which belongs to another time. That which belongs to another rhythm. That which belongs to another generation. This is legacy thinking. This is what Montgomery meant when he showed me that outward pointing thorn. He said, this make you think ahead to this next generation. And here we have an incredible pivot to an ongoing, beautiful story of the Princess Vlei, of how, through community, we retained an essential part of our identity. And it is still here. That place that my grandparents visited is still alive. The place where my parents told me stories of mermaids and the places where people get abducted is still here. I'd like to close with what for me is a fascinating admonition. It comes from a particular writer in the United States who just echoes something which I think all of us will agree to. One of the great mistakes in the conservation movement in the last few years is the tendency to see nature simply as a natural resource. Use it or lose it. This goes under the mantra of sustainable utilization, which, by the way, means it's got to pay its way. I think, in many respects, our landscapes and our wild animals have paid enough. We, in fact, owe them a huge, huge debt. And surely, that there are some things in life which are simply not for sale. And this is part of the moral issue. As I said, there's the identity, and there's the moral issue. Bishop Jeff Davies speaks about the environmental issues of our time today. It's a moral issue that we all know. That morality is not about being self-righteous. It's about knowing that this is the right thing. It's about finding something which will help us to navigate our way through some very, very difficult times. This man goes on to say that conservation without moral values cannot sustain itself. And unless we reach people through beauty, ethics, spiritual values, or whatever, we're going to lose our wilderness areas. We're going to lose them unless we're able to speak from the heart, unless we're able to describe in ways that sometimes only the poets can do, or what the poets can sometimes do, just a little better. And please, don't mess with my identity. I had a very close friend who shortly before she died, having grown up in Rondebosch, went to school, Rustenburg Girls Junior School, high school, worked it right the way through. She said to me, you know, Ian, I no longer recognize myself in this place anymore. It's sad, isn't it? I no longer recognize myself in this place anymore. And I don't think there's one of us here who doesn't take advantage of some of the most amazing developments in the name of progress. There's a lot of good news. But for heaven's sake, let's be very, very careful of becoming indifferent, of giving up, because that is toxic. Yeah. It's one thing to be an activist, it's another thing to be an anti-activist, but for heaven's sake, don't be indifferent. Don't think, oh well, it's not in my backyard, and who really cares? That is what we've got to watch out for in ourselves. I want to finish off this little poem. It was adapted by Ankie Krach, who spoke about Dai Quang as a bushman who featured in the Bleak collections. He was otherwise known as David Hussar. You can only imagine had a heavy cough. But he came from the Carnarvon district, Carnarvon, California area. And he was in Cape Town. And he was speaking about that area where he grew up. Imagine being in his skin when he said this. People were those who broke for me the string. Therefore, the place became like this for me. People were those who broke the string. Therefore, I no longer hear the ringing sound through the sky. Therefore, the place does not feel to me as the place used to feel for me, because the string has been broken for me. The place feels strange to me on account of it. Can you hear a man who's homesick? Can you hear a man who's had serious identity dislocation? I want to say again to Philip Van, to Avril, to Mia Lashbrook, to Emma, through you and through to John, to the many, many people who've been so active in Princess Vlei. Well done. There's still a huge amount of work to be done. It's never going to stop. As I said to Bridget Pitt beforehand, you know, in a way I'm sorry those young children couldn't be here this evening. I can really understand it's still holidays. But the message which I would have loved to have given them would have been a very simple one. And that is that I don't want you to help me. I've come here to help you. If ever people ask me these days how I feel about the future of this country, of course my thoughts go very, very quickly to the future of the environment in this country. I actually feel very, very positive. Why? Because there's this huge growth movement of young people who know injustice, who have a sense of fair play, who have a very, very keen understanding of the environment, far, far keener than I ever had as a schoolboy. So I think we've got lots to look forward to, but for heaven's sake, we will not take it for granted. So please, thank you very much for having me here this evening. Again, Patrick, for your input. Linda, for yours. May we face the future. May the wind be in our face. May we think of the next generations, but may we never forget where we have come from. Thank you very, very much.